welcome back to Newcastle Central. We're doing a little bit of a change from the regular double low gauge stuff, looking at Newcastle Central itself. When I had done some videos back at the start of December, I had shared that I hadn't made an awful lot of progress throughout 2020 on Newcastle Central, and part of that was because I'd been doing quite a bit of work on the N scale side of things. So I wanted to do this video just to share the modules that I had been working on, because I know some people are interested in that T-Trak stuff, the N scale stuff, and some of those American locos that I run. So I want to talk a little bit about what I've been working on, what I was building, and then what it looks like with some trends running through this. So if you do prefer just the British stuff on double O gauge, feel free to skip this video. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy it, and let me know what you think. Alright, so you can see some of the mess maybe is on the bench down below here, but I wanted to try and back up and show what all of these three T-Trak modules look like. I had shared these before. These are the S-shaped modules. So as we kind of move around, you can see that the track moves from the front and makes an S shape towards the back. That's one module. And we transition into that middle module where it's just straight. That's kind of where we have that lake, a little camp scene going on. And so there's two tracks that just run straight through for one of the modules. Let's see if we can now step down and move around and come and look at the far module. And this is then another S-shape transition module to bring the tracks from the back to the front of the module. And so if you remember when I've talked about some of this T-Trak stuff before, let's kind of pan over a little bit. Again, a little bit of mess around the train shed. So these are another couple of the T-Trak modules that I have and some other stuff going on, but the idea is that each of these are modular pieces, and so we can either have a size of a single module. These ones are then, each of these is a double module, and a spin around, and these are then triple length modules, and so all they're doing is dictating how big that module is. And so these are three modules that I'd worked on. I put the boxes, the actual modules, the boxes together well over a year ago, a year and a half ago, and then back in the springtime I started doing all of the scenic work on this. I'm quite happy with how it had turned out, and I did kind of go a little all out in terms of some of the scenic detailing pieces, so things like the actual little shack here and the vehicle. Not cheap from Woodland Scenic, but I think they add a little bit of detail. We kind of pan around into the little camp scene that we have. Again, you know, Woodland Scenic figures a little pricey, but I think they look pretty good. Wasn't super happy with how the water turned out. This was the first time that I've really done water. It didn't end up as murky, I think, as I had hoped for, and so I was glad that I had kind of painted the bottom of the lake here before I then poured that water in place. I think it probably needed to be a lot deeper. This is maybe, oh, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch deep. And I think for the Woodland Scenic murky pour water that I used here, it probably needed to be more like 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. Didn't quite go as murky as I wanted. But again, for what would have been just a shallow little lake, a shallow little pond, probably worked out pretty good. I like how some of the rocks around kind of gave a little bit of a transition between the edges where the bushes are growing. A couple little people paddling around in canoes, some people fishing around there. On the rock work, and now I'll show progression photos as I went through some of the rock work. Okay, not super happy with how some of it turned out, but from a distance I think it's okay. And then kind of a mix of different flock that I had used, some of the grasses that I had used. I haven't done any kind of static grass. I'm still thinking about that. I don't have a static grass applicator, but it's something that I'm looking at. And then coming through, this one doesn't really have much of anything except up on the top. Got a little family of deer hanging around, some of them jumping around, some little babies hanging out there with mama. And again, the idea here is just to add a little bit of scenic interest. One of the things that is sometimes criticized about these T-Trak modules is that really they're just straight pieces of track that kind of run through. And you know, here until you get to that, it's like, oh yeah, there is a trend that will come through there. This is then trying to focus much more on kind of the scenic side of things, which is really kind of what I had done with the yard ones over here. This is more like the diesel maintenance facility. And then as you would move down into a little bit of switching where you would have a little bit of facilities, a little warehouse, something like that. And so these were designed for me to have some operational interest, but also just to show people T-Trak isn't just two straight lines running through. And this certainly is to show that T-Trak is not just two straight lines running through. Let's put up some pictures as I went through, and I'll try and talk through the process of how I got to this. Alright, so I'm also going to hang out on this module, but the process was the same throughout, and I'm going to try and put photos up kind of as I talk through this. So I started out just with some sheets of polystyrene. I guess these were probably half inch, 3/4 of an inch thick probably. They were just some sheets of polystyrene I had hanging around. I think actually they may have come as packaging polystyrene on something that I had ordered. So I had a few sheets of these, and so just kind of cut down loosely to the shape that I wanted, kind of beveled on the edges and the sides. And so I think all of them have at least 2 layers of this polystyrene, and then some of them, to kind of make a little bit more, I use little pieces to kind of add them up. Build them up just kind of rough. I didn't need it to be super duper smooth on the edges. And then from that, I then used some of the plaster cloth. So these are just strips of plaster cloth basically. Rather than having big sheets of it, I used rolls. And so the rolls themselves are maybe 3 inches wide. So they're pretty easy to work with. You just kind of cut the length, and then you dip them in water, kind of rinse out a little bit of the water that's on there, and then kind of lay them over. And so you can then mold it into the shape that you want. I think I did 2 layers, so you kind of put on 1 layer, let it dry, and then put on a second layer, let those dry just to kind of help smooth it, and then I think I lightly sanded it. That was kind of the messy part. Putting on the plaster cloth was as well. You kind of get that messy water all over the place, but doing the actual sanding was probably the messiest part. So from there, what I wanted to make sure was that I had this weathered track look. So I kind of just move in on the track itself. It'd be really hard to tell if this is Cod or Unitrack unless you look closely. And just to kind of give a comparison, this is where the module joins. This is actually the same track that's in use on both of the modules. Okay, so there's that kind of Cado on the left-hand side. That's what you usually see on these kind of T-Trak modules. And then what I went with was that I wanted to weather it all down. And then I wanted to use ballast as well. So for the weathering, initially what I had done was I got a spray can of, I think it was Krylon Camouflage Brown, which is exactly the same that I used on Newcastle Central. Actually, it was someone from the United Northwest Model Railroad Club that had shown me that a while ago. So you basically just spray it on pretty liberally, and then clean the top of the rails quick before it dries up. And so what you end up with is this kind of brown look all the way over. And what you're doing is you're kind of spraying the inside of the rails and the sleeper ties and stuff like that. So from there, I then had done some of the actual grass work. So I think I just had one mix of the colors down and found that it wasn't quite right. And so I think when I did the rest, I then mixed in and put in a couple of different colors, and then ballasted the track. So ballasting the track was exact same process that I've used on Newcastle Central. I think it was the Woodland Scenic fine gray ballast that I had used. It works pretty good for N scale. Again, it's actually the exact same ballast that I use on Newcastle Central, I think. I'm pretty sure it's the exact same. I had a whole jar of it, so I just used the same. And then from there, I did a little bit more of the scenic work, did some of the things like bushes and added things like that in. And then the actual track weathering itself for the ballast rather than the track for the actual ballast weathering, that was then just taking some of the Humbrol weathering powders. I think Gary at Cheeky Tech I had seen do something similar, where you take some of the weathering powders, mix it in with a little bit of water, and I didn't really follow any particular mix on it. I didn't really have certain amounts of powder to water. I just kind of mix it until I thought it looked good, and then kind of, just put it on with a paintbrush, really. And so we've got blacks that are kind of in between the rails, because this would have been a lot of diesel traffic going through. And then on the outside of the rails, it was the dark earth weathering powder. I think it was smoke I actually used for the black on the inside of the rails, and then it was dark earth weathering powder mixed with water on the outside of the rails. And then I think that looks pretty good. It's not super uniform, it wouldn't be, but it also does then dirty the tracks up pretty good. And again, coming and comparing it to that Strat Carter Unitrack, it is very, very different. So the rock faces themselves, they were just kind of left exposed. That's just the plaster cloth underneath, which is why I said some places not super happy with how it turned out. You've got some kind of weird straight lines in there that probably wouldn't have been there. That one looks a little bit better. There are some kind of different shapes in there, but I think that's kind of how it would have looked. That's just then kind of painted with some acrylic grey and then dry brushed on with a lighter grey. And again, there's areas where some of that lighter grey dry brushing was maybe a little bit too thick, but from a distance, I think it looks okay. The leg itself, like I say, I wasn't super happy with how the pour turned out, but again, used some of the ballast that I had around the edges there. It painted the base brown, the plaster cloth that was there, painted that brown. And then the rocks around the outside is just some little gravel that I actually had out along the driveway. Don't tell the wife that I took some off the driveway. And so it's a good little mix. Maybe it's a little bit oversized, but as you'll be crawling around ponds like this, there would often be pretty large rocks that would be there. So that worked out pretty good, I think. And then, yeah, it was the Woodland Scenic Murky Pour, so it's like a two-part thing. One is a reactive agent that you mix in, mix, and for like 5 minutes, and then let it sit. And then you just pour it in and let it dry up. So it worked pretty good, but like I said, I don't think it was deep enough. I think if I was doing it again, I would make that deeper. But overall, it's pretty good. And because this is fairly high up, you're not normally looking down on it like this, so it's really not that big of a deal. So quite happy with how that overall turned out. And then the trees, let's come in. There's an awful lot of trees. The trees, I think, are Fowler trees or cork trees. I'll put into the comments of the video exactly what they are, as I forget. But I got these through Walthers, which is a U.S. railroad manufacturer and distributor. They do make a bunch of their own buildings, but they also then sell some of the kind of third-party railroad products as well. And so these trees, I had looked at making my own. I've seen a few different ways that you could make these kinds of trees. And on the larger N-Track modules that I have, which is kind of what these T-Track modules are based off, this kind of S-shaped mountain module transition. The larger N-Track modules, which are the 4 foot by 2 foot, 4 foot by 3 foot modules that I have, they use homemade trees, and it's basically a kebab skewer, wooden kebab skewer, and then you use kind of filter media from an aquarium or from a furnace, ripped into pieces. you use hairspray, spray on, and you sprinkle on some of the green flocking, and then you spray it again to set it, and it looks good, but I think it looks better if you had larger trees, and on here I was aware that scale-wise those larger trees probably wouldn't have worked, and so these I think work out great. They give some sense of scale, but they're not massive, they're not completely oversized. You know, if you come in and look at the size of the trees compared to that little shack in the truck, or if we come over to our campsite where we can see the scale of the trees. Kind of focus. There we go. See the scale of the trees compared to the people in there. You know, they're not ridiculous. You can tell that these are somewhat large trees, without being too crazy. So I think I have 60 trees in total across these modules. So there was a little bit of cost there. I think it was, you know, $30 for a pack of 30. You know, so there was a good amount of money in trees here, but the rest of it was really just, you know, stuff that I was making along as I went. Because there's not a lot of track work, there's no turnouts in this, so that kind of kept the cost low. I think I had all the track pieces. The only thing that's a little different with these transition modules, if you look at doing them yourself, you can find this online as part of the T-Trak wiki. But you actually cut a couple of sections, so these curves are just fixed cardo pieces on both ends, but then it's kind of a custom length for these strap pieces. So you do need to cut them just to length as you need them to be, but that's kind of a lot of talking and waffling about how I went through it. Hopefully some of the photos along the way have made sense. I am also then going to just do a few different running shots probably throughout as we've gone here, just to break it up a little bit and see some trends. Going to wrap it up now with some more running shots of various different trends running through here, and you know, I think that's more where it starts to look good, because rather than just trends running in straight lines, now you start to see how they would start to be winding around things as they were kind of been following the contours of the land, or you know, how much blasting would it have taken to clear some of the spaces. Would they have just, you know, done a gentle curve instead to get around it? So I hope you have enjoyed this. Like I said, this took a good chunk of time. This was probably a good 4 or 5 months on and off throughout 2020, over the spring and the summertime. That's why I hadn't been doing a lot on Newcastle Central. I kind of had this early on, I kind of had this hope that we would have been able to get back into model train show season, which would have been kicking off in the middle of August here in the US. Fortunately, that didn't happen. We're now in the middle of January, and basically all the shows have been cancelled, and there's not really looking like there's going to be anything coming up. Maybe it would be next August. So this is why I've been working on these. I had hoped that I would have been able to get back together with some of the guys from United Northwest Model Railroad Club. We could have been running some trends. I could have been sharing these modules with the public at different shows. That didn't happen, but at least I've got them now. The only thing really left to do is the skyboards. These are just a couple of skyboards that I had off those other modules. So I am trying to figure out if I want to just have these kind of plain painted blue, or if I want to look at doing a photo background. I have seen those as well. A little bit pricey though, again, to do a photo background for something that's going to be 6 feet long. So I'm just still trying to figure that out, but I got plenty of time before I'm going to be going off to shows with these. But hope you've enjoyed this. Like I said, a little bit different from the regular Newcastle Central. I have still been doing a little bit of work. I was finally able to get the platform building inside the house. We had a little bit of a break in the rain, so there's some progress going on there. So next video coming back should be back at Newcastle Central, but hope you've enjoyed this little N-scale diversion, some of the American locos running around. Let me know what you think, and we'll be back again soon. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.